there's decades where nothing happens,
Yeah,
and there's
yeah.
weeks where decades happen, right? Like during Corona, at the beginning of Corona, the remote work went like 30, 40, 50 points vertical. It did like a decade of adoption in like a few weeks. All these kinds of things went like vertical or horizontal or, down, right?
You're here because I think you're claiming this is one of those 2 weeks where a decade's happen. And all of a sudden, you have been inundated with intention about this crazy, crazy bet that you've made where you think that Bitcoin, our beloved asset, is going to become worth $1 million inside of the next 90 days, which when you take into account, people will call that a bold call. And so this has made the internet all pivot their attention to this claim, which is a crazy, crazy claim that I think people aren't totally understanding or willing to accept. So Balaji, maybe you can kind of walk us through your thought process here. Like, how is Bitcoin going to become worth $1 million in the next 3 months?
So here's the thing is, I don't think I've ever made a price prediction or something like that. Just not what I do. I'm not a price guy. I'm not a chart guy. That's, if you look at, I've been in the, for what's worth, I've been in the public eye for 10 years. I have tens of thousands of tweets. I have hundreds of pages of writing, whatever, hours of podcasts, including some with you guys, right? Essays and so on and so forth. And there's enough context there where people, I think, know that I'm not like I'm not a money motivated person. I'm an ideological person. In our talks, and so on, I've never been like, oh, price, blah, blah. So let me just back up for a second, okay? 12 days ago, Silicon Valley Bank and Silvergate and then Silicon Valley Bank like basically just collapsed overnight. There's no warning, right? Just boom, done. And then this gigantic, this $200 billion bank with 40,000 tech companies, people who had done basically nothing, they're just going about their business, suddenly found that their checking accounts, the money was gone, right? Like, and then they were being blamed as if, wanting their checking account back was like a bailout or something like that, as if they had done something risky. And this is this whole frantic kind of thing over the weekend. And some people were acting tactically, and they were trying to figure out, how to like, fix the situation or whatever. But I was like, how could this possibly have happened? And I started like looking at all of the numbers that I could find online. And just to summarize what I found, and I'll show you a zillion references on this because it's actually kind of crazy. The central bank, meaning the Fed, the banks, and the bank regulators have all known for at least the past year that hundreds of banks in the US are insolvent, meaning Uncle Sam Bankman-Fried. They don't have assets on hand on a mark-to-market basis to match their liabilities. Uncle Sam Bankman-Fried is the best way of understanding this because Sam Bankman-Fried, whether he lied to himself or he lied to others or whatever complicated thing, remember he had this balance sheet that was this crazy balance sheet, which, like in his head, it added up to more than what people were asking for, their money out, right? And until the stress test actually came and people actually withdrew their money, neither he nor they knew how much money he actually had because he wasn't just holding it on like a one-for-one basis. He was doing these crazy conversions, exposing everybody to market risk and so on and so forth, right? Essentially, he took people's trust. He took their deposits. He invested them in these, shit coins and they, or spent it on something, whatever the heck he did, marked it as if it was still there. And then, but when they actually came for it, there was a huge hole, right? We now know that story. Okay. That is basically what has happened. And the funny thing is, Amjad Masad and I in the fall of 2022, we were like, that's kind of what fiat banking is also because of fractional reserve and so on. If everybody actually asked for their money at the same time, they wouldn't be able to get it back. But the situation we've got now is so much worse than even fractional reserve. And what that is that the banks all did something very much like Sam Bankman-Fried. They took your deposits and they bought long-dated treasuries and other long-dated government bonds in 2021, essentially on the guidance of the federal government, or especially the Fed, really, that they were going to keep interest rates low for a long time. And then the Fed raised rates in 2022 in this sort of surprise, super high hike, crushed the portfolios of every single entity that had trusted them. And stuck the banks with this giant surprise of this massive devaluation of bonds. And you can see, and I found all these links where the bankers are basically panicking about this over 2022. And you know what they come up with? They basically come up with an accounting trick, okay, called hold to maturity. I call it hide to maturity, where just like Sam Bankman-Fried, they book it as having not depreciated. Oh, it's still worth what we paid for it. Whew, we're good, right? And this time bomb just grew larger and larger and larger and larger across the entire industry, with everybody obviously knowing about it. And again, whether they were lying to themselves or they're lying to others, what they didn't do is they didn't notify you, the depositor, that the money was gone. For not just SVB, but for like millions of depositors across the country and every bank that has US treasuries and long dated government bonds. This is one of those things, like saying, like, if you have a problem, like if you owe the bank $1 million, you have a problem. If you owe the bank $1 billion, the bank has a problem, right? If you have one bank failure, that's a bank's problem. If you have hundreds of bank failures, that's a central bank's problem. Backing up for a second, what is a proposed action that people should take? Get your coins, get whatever you can into crypto, okay? I recommend Bitcoin at this point. It is going to be the lifeboat for a number of different reasons. Of course, if you have other cryptocurrency, whatever, obviously you guys are Ethereum guys. I'm not, let's just say that all of the crypto tribalism is going to rise to like a ideological level that we've never seen in a year or 2 years or whenever this crisis is over. But in this crisis, there'll be three kinds of zones: fiat only zones, where crypto is banned or seized and only the government can have it because it's used to back the currency. Bitcoin only zones, like maximalist zones, and then crypto free zones where you can use whatever cryptocurrency you want. Okay. And one of the reasons is a lot of fiat banks are about to die. They all trusted the Fed at the same time. The centralization at the Fed, buying the same asset at the same time, getting it devalued by the same vendor, namely the Fed, in the same way, then all going bust at once. That's basically what's happening.
So Balaji, I just want to put kind of the timeline together and ask how you have been piecing this together, right?
Sure.
So we had Silvergate Bank and Silicon Valley Bank. That happens the weekend of the 11th and 12th, let's call it, right? You put up the bit signal on March 16th. So that was Thursday after that weekend. And the bit signal is basically like you telling people that Bitcoin was going to go up. You said this: how do you ring the fire alarm on the internet? How do you show it's not a false alarm? I'm putting up the bit signal, $1 million in Bitcoin to alert us to the stealth financial crisis, $1,000 per tweet for the best 1,000, reply with your charts, graphs, stats, and memes. So you're clearly propagating a message. One question I have for you is to some of the doubters, maybe let's just address this at the beginning. So this is previous to the bet. So some people are saying, Balaji, that this tweet and also the bet itself is kind of like promotion. It's basically advertising for your bags, which are crypto-centric bags. How do you respond to that critique?
The thing is, if I didn't hold crypto, they would say, oh, you don't actually have skin in the game. You're just doing it for attention and so on and so forth, right? All I can say on that is hold dollars then. Okay, if you don't believe me, hold dollars and then see what happens, right? If you don't believe me, buy short-dated treasuries, like 3 months, and just say Balaji's crazy and, whatever, fine, go ahead. But this is like, if you look at the full context of everything I've said, it's impossible to prove, quote, motivation or whatever, okay? But if you look at all the tweets and everything I've ever said, this is something where this is like the crisis that Bitcoin was built for. Like Bitcoin was born out of crisis, the 2008 crisis, and this is the 2023 banking crisis.
And I remember, Balaji, that you were very, very early to the COVID crisis. And so I remember you were sounding the COVID alarm in January, February, and then COVID hit in March. And so you have a track record of doing this, and at least once before that I can remember. And it being contrarian at the time. And while this is very different from COVID, I will have to say that you have one very strong mark of sounding an alarm in a prior crisis, at least a couple months ahead of time. So this is not a new activity for you.
Yeah, it's not fun. It's not fun, right? Because everybody thinks you're crazy or you're doing it for attention. Because essentially both the virus, well, first, let me talk about COVID for a second. Let me come back to that. People are saying it was a paranoid conspiracy theory to say that coronavirus would ever spread out of China. Obviously, you're a racist, blah, blah, blah. But obviously, public health people had been thinking about pandemics for a while. And at the time, that was a good way of sort of framing that this was not like a threat that a crazy person was coming up with, but that public health people were. And I had sort of a mental model of the world, right? Like imagine there's like a bunch of rubber bands between countries like Taiwan, China, right? Or India, Pakistan, or Bitcoin, Ethereum, right? There's these various rubber bands between groups, right? Stress tensions and so on. And then when you have like a shock to the system where someone goes from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0, a lot of those, rubber bands update and the system moves into a new conformation, okay? And so that's kind of how I was thinking about this. Like I had like, this sort of chessboard in my head. And I was like, okay, if this hits, how does that move this, and this, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Okay.
And by the way, for listeners, this was a January 30th, 2020 tweet timestamp is what we're talking about. So well before the general U.S.
6
public
weeks,
became aware.
6 or 7
6
weeks.
weeks or so.
And I'll show you how you can, if you just scroll down a little bit, you'll see how I did it, right? So first is I was following the raw data. I had some background in, before I got into crypto, I was actually, basically doing computational genomics and statistics, and especially microbial genomics, right? So I had some background in the space, so I had some lenses with which I could read some of the technical literature. Viruses are exponential. And the thing about this, at the time, by the way, that's funny. It's like, total confirmed cases outside was like less than 1,000 or whatever, right? So everyone's like, look, it's so low. I'm like, yeah, but is it like somebody who knows viruses, knows tech? It's about like rate of growth, and this is like a pretty high rate of growth. And the thing about this, by the way, and one thing I'll just back up for a second and say, as of January 2023, 3 years later, people believe two things about COVID. First, a novel virus out of China infected more than 700 million people worldwide, killing about 1% of them, and seriously sickening another tens of millions of people, causing significant upheaval by all kinds of governments and a huge tech shock, right? On the other hand, they also think, yeah, it wasn't that big a deal, life went on. Both of those things, I would say the combination of both those two facts is actually what I'd say the conventional wisdom is as of January 2023. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Roughly? But the thing about that is, while I agree life went on, and it wasn't like the end of life on Earth or anything, and we're lucky that it wasn't like the Spanish flu or something, that was certainly not, like if I'd said in January, 700 million people will get infected, 7 million will die, but life will go on. That would be the weirdest projection ever, okay? It would sound terrifying and preposterous, but then also, and this is important, the concept of normality of some kind being restored on the other side would have also seemed preposterous. That is a very non-obvious frame of mind, which is a frame of mind I'm in kind of now, okay? We're basically in, and I'll get into details, we're basically in the fiat crisis, okay? We're in the crisis where like all the centralization of fiat, all the opacity of fiat, all of the, all the things that Satoshi talked about, all of that is now blowing up on people in a very tangible way. And really, it's kind of remarkable. And so now the thing is, we're going to have a wrenching transition to the crypto economy, where just like remote work kind of went like vertical because people just had to, right? A lot of fiat systems are going to break potentially over the next weeks and months and maybe years. And we're going to have to switch over to crypto systems. And it'll be a big pain, a huge pain, of which the single most important is the transition to Bitcoin as a global reserve currency. But there will be normality of some kind on the other side.
To continue leveling up your crypto game, then you need to get on the Bankless newsletter. It's the world's most popular crypto email and is completely free. Just click below to sign up.